Pearson Rabbit's story begins with Dr. Stephanie Pearson, a passionate OB/GYN at the height of her career. But when a shoulder injury struck during a precipitous delivery, her dreams were shattered, leaving her unable to practice medicine. Determined to make a difference, Stephanie became an advocate for her peers, guiding them through the complex disability process. Alongside insurance expert Scott Ravitz, Stephanie founded Pearson Ravitz, a company determined to approach insurance differently. Together, they set their mission to educate and empower physicians to protect their most valuable asset, their income, and the most important people in their life, their family.
Today, Pearson Ravitz serves the medical community in all 50 states. At Pearson Ravitz, they understand the unique concerns of physicians. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Ravitz builds human connections before they create quotes. Life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness or injury could leave you and your family in a devastating financial situation. But with a little planning and guidance, you can prepare for every possibility. Visit PearsonRavitz.com today to schedule your consultation with the Pearson Ravitz advisor.
Finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Drs. May and Tim Hindmarsh.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode. BS Free MD with Tim and May Hindmarsh. And on today's episode, we are super excited to have back with us Dr. Harvey Risch. He's an esteemed epidemiologist, and he's joining the podcast with us to discuss a pressing issue that has emerged in the wake of the, I hate to even say the word, C-19 pandemic, the rise of aggressive cancers, now colloquially, I can't even say that word very well, termed turbo cancers. The conversation we have with him kind of goes into the potential connections between these cancers and the C-19 jabs, and talk about the nuanced perspective about the growing concern.
Yeah, Dr. Risch also addresses the alarming trend of aggressive cancers, particularly noting their seeming rise post-COVID vaccine. While conclusive data linking these cancers directly to the vaccines is lacking, yeah, don't hold your breath until those data come out. Dr. Risch emphasizes the need for more rigorous cancer surveillance, especially among vaccinated individuals. He pointed out the inadequacy of current screening recommendations, in urging healthcare systems to consider more frequent screenings to catch some such cancers early. Again, we don't have the answers. We're just asking the questions, and we're asking them of somebody who literally studied cancer epidemiology for his entire career. So buckle up, kids. It's going to be awesome.
It was a great discussion, yes.
Okay. Welcome back. A little bit of insight into our new life. Tonight is trivia night at the country club. And so my mission is to try to go there and clean up on all of these people that are 5 to 10 years older than me, because trivia is my thing. So today, so that we can mentally do the gymnastics needed to be smarter than we actually are, we have one of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life, Dr. Harvey Risch, on the show today. Harvey, welcome back to BS Free MD.
Thank you. Now I have to tell my wife that.
Yes,
absolutely.
Well, there's intelligence, and then there's the practical intelligence of living together, which I think is potentially two different things. So I'm not.
I just hope I can, I don't know, soak some of it up through the nether worlds of the internet, or, just, it hasn't worked sitting next to Tim. I haven't soaked any of his brain intelligence for all that trivia. I don't know where he stores it all in that. Well, I guess part of that brain.
It's the alien shaped head. It's amazing how powerful it is.
What I think is when you feed in all this stuff, the other stuff all goes out,
like
all falls
finding
out.
Stuff in the refrigerator.
Exactly. Like finding butter.
Yeah.
Gone, completely
Anyway.
gone. Anyways, welcome back. We were going to talk a little bit about, kind of what's new and sexy in the epidemiological, can't even say it, epidemiological
Well,
world.
I was hoping, and I think we shared with you, we wanted to kind of see what your thoughts are on the topics, trends, observations related to cancers that, what's out there in the data world as far as the turbo cancers that we're hearing about. Is it just anecdotal? Is it real? What do we know? As well as other morbidity and mortality stuff coming out. So,
yeah, I mean, your career, correct us if we're wrong, you largely were, your research was largely into cancer, correct?
Yes, and causes of cancer, epidemiologic causes of cancer. You have to pardon my raspy voice. I'm still fighting with this cold that I got from traveling a week
no
ago.
problem for us. And hey, are you sure it's just a cold? No, I'm kidding.
Well, yes, I'm sure. It only
That's
had two
right.
symptoms,
It is.
so
It's
yeah,
just a
perfect.
cold.
So let's just dive right into that. This, we've heard, I've do a ton of reading, lots of Substacks, et cetera, plus just, our eyes, the people we have seen that have either not had cancer or had reactivations of cancer that we know. And it's just like, it seems like there seems to be more diagnoses of these really intense, aggressive cancers that just came on in like months instead of years. But then, you read people like Alex Berenson, he's like, turbo cancer isn't a thing. And he's super confident about that, which always makes me nervous if somebody's super confident about anything. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I think turbo cancer is a thing, and I think it is happening, but I think it's not very common. It just gets a lot of attention. And I think cancer as a whole is happening more. Again, it's not all that common, but it is happening. And I base this on a few things. First of all, maybe two and a half years ago, when people asked me about cancer, I said, well, cancer takes 5, 10, 20 years to develop, and a vaccine given now is not going to be causing a disease that takes 5, 10, or 20 years until 5, 10, 20 years from now. So the first thing you're likely to see is the very short latency cancers, which are the blood cancers, leukemias and lymphomas. And then maybe 5 years from now, you might start to be seeing lung cancers. And 10 years from now, you might start to be seeing pancreatic cancers and GI cancers. And colon cancer is going to take even longer, and bladder cancer is going to take even longer. So that's the time frame. You might also see reactivations of dormant cancers. Breast cancer is a notorious example. Breast cancer gets treated, sits indolent, quiescent for 20 years, and then comes out of its indolence to be a more aggressive disease in the 70s, 60s and 70s years of age. And we don't know why that happens. And maybe it's because immune surveillance declines with age, and the immune system has been keeping it in check all these years, and then suddenly that stops working, or some other hypothetical mechanism. And so that's kind of what was originally been seeing is we've been seeing now evidence of some of these blood cancers, and for breast cancers coming out of remission, and for other cancers. Now, the fact that these things are being seen makes them noteworthy, and so it gets attention. So we don't really know the frequency that this is happening. However, I saw yesterday a report, might have been from Ed Dowd, on cases of cancer registered in the VAERS database, and there have been increasing numbers there that are indicative. And the first cancers that have been registered are blood cancers and cancers coming out of remission, as I predicted 2 years ago. So the evidence seems to show that this is happening. It doesn't mean that it's happening in a major way or that these are major risks for vaccinated people, but that has been observed.
So I guess the first question, I'm thinking, and probably our listeners are, is this related to COVID infections with the disease itself, or being vaccinated, or both, or boosters? Is there any way to separate that data out yet?
At this point, it's not possible to tell. I suspect that given what we know about the adverse effects of the vaccines themselves, that it's more likely to be from vaccination because this wasn't being seen in 2020. It started in 2021 and increased from then. Again, it's a little hard to separate, and we won't know for sure. And anybody can claim, oh, it was the COVID. But, viruses as causes of cancer have been very limited to specific carcinogenic viruses like SV40 and a few other things that are not generally properties of the respiratory viruses as a whole.
Right. But it also, I was thinking about an apt analogy for just fooling with the immune system. It's this part of medicine where we really don't know that much. I mean, and the more we learn about how the immune system works, the more we realize what we don't know, so to speak, and how little we actually know. And I kind of liken it to, when you're throwing this novel technology where it can potentially spit out spike protein for honestly nobody knows how long, and it can do that in all of your cells, and it's just an inflammatory agent that messes with your immune system. And we know the immune system is vitally important in cancer surveillance. It's just, I kind of liken you mess with the immune system. It's like messing with the pancreas. Don't piss off your pancreas because it's filled with digested enzymes and it does bad things.
Well, I would liken it to the psychiatric diseases that we know about 3 neurotransmitters, and we've been messing around with them for 30 years, and it hasn't really done us very good.
No, actually, some would argue it's done us much, much worse. And I've become one of those people where it's like, yes, maybe we should just go back to Freudian psychoanalysis and be done with all this stuff.
So I'm thinking, in like the absence of really good numerical data still so far, but just sort of thoughts on what's going to happen. Like, how do we, because we get questions from listeners. We have a personal friend who, for instance, and I won't say her name, but she won't mind sharing her situation, had her regular, every 5, I think, maybe 7-year colonoscopy routine, everything fine.
Yeah, I think the last one she had was 3 years prior?
Right. No problems, no history, no polyps. Then develops, symptoms of, I have a backache, which she had ignored for about half a year. Turns out it was liver metastases from a stage 4 colon cancer that had metastasized to her liver. And it's turned into a nightmare. And the fact that they've had to, put her on chemo to reduce the size of the liver cancer first, did the surgery. Then once she finally got her colon cancer surgery, they were blown away at how aggressive and invasive it was. And now it seems like maybe it's back metastasizing again. Basically, she's convinced because she had one booster that it was the booster. She said her physicians up at the tertiary center where she's at they have no explanation why this such an aggressive colon cancer stage 4 would happen in regular surveillance. So people hear that, her included, and she's like, what's the, is this just a fluke thing? Or how can you not extrapolate that to think that it's not related to COVID, coronavirus, booster, vaccine in some way, or with all that's going on? And then, of course, everybody else around that's seeing this is thinking, oh, shit, what does that mean for the rest of us? Because if we do our regular colon cancer screening or any cancer screening, does it mean anything if these things can pop up in between? So any thoughts?
Well, do we know whether there was something missed on the screening?
Yeah.
The colon cancers take 30 years for normal development, the sequence of mutations and derangements of the cellular physiology to go from aberrant cells that escape the immune system surveillance to fully, tumors, cancers in situ, in the colon itself before they even metastasize. So for something to happen in the course of 2 years would be dramatically different if that actually happened compared to the normal sequence of all the mutations that have to be accumulated in the cells to become cancers. That cancers don't generally happen by a single mutation in the DNA of a single cell, but they they start that way, but they accumulate more and more mutations until the cell goes haywire, and the immune system is unable to, for whatever reasons, to knock the cell out, and the cell's been proliferating, and there's too many of them, and they escape the immune surveillance. So it's, in theory, it's possible that this could happen over a 2 or 3 year period. It seems pretty unlikely, but I mean, we're in uncharted territory with what the spike protein does, both genetically and inflammatorily, and so we don't really know.
Yeah, that's such a great place to be. I don't really know, and my body's potentially cranking out stuff too. That's inflammatory. Like when you think of it, like the more I was out running this morning, and I was just thinking of this, and I go like how did we ever get to the point where somebody said, I know what we'll do. We'll hijack your own cellular machinery to make an inflammatory agent, but then we'll add this pseudo-uridine so that it lasts way longer than natural messenger RNA does, because if we inject it, it just gets decayed and doesn't do anything. And then we won't really know how long it lasts because we haven't done any human studies, and the animal studies suck because we killed the animals. But somehow it's going to be a perfectly good research project to do on 5 billion people. Like when you start pulling, pulling the airplane to 50,000 feet and looking down, you just go, how in the name of common sense did this ever get this far?
Well, I would ask, which people have common sense? Our universities are not training people to have common sense. They're training people to have technical theories about life. This is the definition of an intellectual, as a person who believes in theories, not their common sense.
We've seen that just day to day.
No, but that's exactly right, though. Like we had a very nice conversation last night with Ed Dowd, and I said to him, some of the smartest people that kind of saw through the bullshit the most were people that had zero education out of high school. I mean, I had some of the best conversations with, we worked in a logging community for most of our careers with loggers and truck drivers. They're like, why would I want to be part of an experiment? That don't make no sense to me. Well, they were right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, right. I mean, that's what I say. You fill people's brains up with theories and all the common sense tumbles out.
Exactly.
So here's my thinking. So maybe we can talk a little bit about, if we don't have, we're just kind of waiting to seeing what the numbers are and how things play out. What do we trust? Because we know how VAERS data was. I mean, some people report things, some people don't. Then there's self-reporting. I know a lot of clinicians, when we were working, refused. Well, you're still working, I should say. When we were working and even through the COVID clinics and seeing people come in with side effects, I reported stuff on VAERS. It was onerous. I've shared this multiple times, like just the whole fact that you spend an hour filling this in, it's tedious. And then a lot of physicians didn't want to do it because they're afraid of retaliation legally if they didn't do it right, et cetera. But so if we're not confident in maybe the VAERS, or do we rely on the American Cancer Society or the cancer data stats instead? What do we look to?
Well, we will be able to rely on it in another 5 years. Unfortunately, the annual cancer facts and figures from the American Cancer Society, which is a very reliable, trustworthy organization and document as far as documenting cancer incidence and mortality in the United States, it extrapolates from U.S. national information, which as of now is only complete through 2020. So we're not going to see anything for the vaccines until the U.S. national information is updated and the cancer facts and figures gets new information from which to extrapolate going forward. So we're kind of stuck that way. I agree with you. In my opinion, VAERS is public theater. VAERS was set up to make it look like FDA and CDC were doing something, but they set up a system that is essentially scientifically unworkable and invalid from an epidemiologic point of view. And then, of course, they made it even more difficult by being obsessive about the questions that they asked. So the questions are so long and detailed that it cuts in the response rates of people actually trying to fill them out. I've gone through VAERS and the FAERS, which is the medications adverse events reporting system in parallel. And while you think from an epidemiologic point of view that the more questions that you ask in detail, the better the information is. But in fact, that can be counterproductive when it keeps people from completing the questionnaires, when they give up in despair that it's taking so long and the system times out on them and they have to start all over again, and they don't have time because their patients are asking them questions, they have to see them, and all this sort of stuff. So it's not a scientifically reliable database. The FDA acknowledges that fact and says we don't draw any causal conclusions from it. We only look at it for signals, so to speak. And the only signals that actually come out of it are reported things that happen basically 1 in a million in normal life. So something that happens in 1 in a million in normal life, when you see 2 cases in VAERS, okay, you got a signal. So they'll say, okay, we got to study this in theory. But that is things that are 1 in a million in normal life have no practical application in times of emergency, like it was proclaimed for COVID, that we don't care about things that happen 1 in a million if they're happening at 5 in a million in COVID, which would be a signal, because we're much more concerned about the common adverse events, and those being common, the VAERS doesn't provide signals for that because it's unreliable. So the system as a whole is just useless, and it was put there to make it look like FDA and CDC were complying with congressional mandates and public, desires to record all this stuff in a transparent fashion, but it's not, because it's a useless system.
Absolutely. I mean, what you said is totally true. I remember filling that in, and there's the time pressure. You're not getting paid extra to sit there for 3 hours at night to do it. I remember I had 2 cases in a row that one night, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm off the clock. I'm doing this just because it's the right thing to do. But yeah, I'd get into it, and you think, oh, I'll just enter in with the findings, the clinical findings, and et cetera. And it just goes on. And then after a while, you're just like, screw it is the polite way to say it. Cause it's like, this is freaking annoying.
Right.
It's taking forever. It's getting even more complicated. I don't even care anymore, which is horrible to say, but it's the truth.
And you get to a point, well, wait a minute, I don't have that information. I have to go back and look in the chart. Where did I put the chart?
Well,
and all this sort of stuff.
And then they actually, have the disclaimer on there that if you do a false VAERS report,
it's punishable by fines and jail time and the whole. Nah, but
well, that's intentional fabrication.
I wasn't really worried about that.
But it's on there. I mean, it's kind of like if you go to the DMV and you suffer through going to the DMV in Southern California, and you have the mileage on your vehicle is off by 10 miles, we can throw you in jail. And it's like, okay, well, oh, thanks. I guess I'll make an appointment and pay the $100 to have the DMV specialist people do it for me. And I mean, I never filled out a single VAERS thing. I saw stuff that was, I'm sure was the vaccine.
You bad doctor.
People with arms red from a vaccination for 3 months. Like, when has that happened before? Well, I don't know. Never. Like but you could just as easily rationalize stuff away. But then when you looked at it again from 10,000 or 30,000 feet, you're like, holy crap. Like, I haven't seen a POTS syndrome in my life, and I saw 2 this week. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen a kid with atypical chest pain and an anomalous EKG ever. And like, what is going on here? I mean, it was obvious.
It was to the point where 3/4 of the people we were seeing we would have to be filling out VAERS reports. No kidding.
Well, so there's the trade-off is this. These things happen, and they happen in a substantial or appreciable but small number of people. So I would call them infrequent but important. You have to realize that if you vaccinate 300 million Americans, that if something happens in 1 in 1,000, that you're going to have, what is that, 30,000 people with serious adverse events. And that's not a small number for those people, for the population, even though 1 in 1,000 is pretty small. And nobody would say, oh, I've got a risk of 1 in 1,000 of an adverse event from this vaccine, I'll go for the vaccine. The rational calculation for an individual is to take the vaccine. The rational calculation for society may not be, because 30,000 or even more, a bigger percent, is a substantial load of adversity that the society probably doesn't want to tolerate, because the virus itself didn't cause that degree of societal dysfunction in reality, not what was propagandized to us, but in reality. Now, there's evidence that mild pericarditis in young males is probably on the order of somewhere between 1 in 50 and 1 in 200. That's still infrequent, but when you vaccinate 70 million of them, just, you're going to get 700,000 damaged males. And the society cannot tolerate that, especially the armed forces can't tolerate that. And this becomes a problem, even at the same time that the society can say, oh, but this is still rare. 1 in 100 is still rare. It's still in your interest to take the vaccines because it's not likely to happen to you. So you have conflicting values, scientific values in this, where the government says it's infrequent and therefore you should do it. And the probabilities are, yes, it's infrequent, but there's so many people who have been hurt by this that the society shouldn't be doing it, that the risk-benefit trade-off is not benefit because the organism, the virus itself was not as damaging.
And it depends on your definition of infrequent, because 1 in 100, if I knew I was going to win a lottery, I'd be buying 100 tickets. And you're right. People just, what were you going to say?
No, but the last statement that Harvey made was exactly correct. It's that the vaccine clearly in certain certain demographics is more dangerous than the virus.
Right.
That's the point. Like, it doesn't matter how safe the vaccine is if the virus is harmless. Like, even if it's a 1 in a million chance that something happens, you're vaccinating for nothing. You're vaccinating for I thought the world was going to change when Damar Hamlin collapsed on TV. I thought, okay, we've opened the can, and even if they try to not say anything or call us all conspiracy theorists or whatever, but then LeBron James' son, has a cardiac arrest trying out, in Southern California, what he was working out with, USC or UCLA. And I thought, okay, that's it. We're done. Like this guy's got to come out and say, this is crazy. We're killing black young men, athletes that are super ultra fit and nothing, like crickets. And I'm like, what has poisoned your mind?
Well, financial interest plus propaganda plus cover up. So I think there's something now like 10,000 individual reports of sudden deaths from, unexplained causes. And this is certainly nothing like anything that's ever happened in the demographic before the vaccine. And the fact is that we've never had government agencies so uninterested in pursuing anything that could lead to adverse repercussions on what they've approved, that it is a massive conspiracy to not obtain information showing how bad these vaccines could have been.
Well, that's it though. It's the not looking at all. And I thought with these two unbelievably high profile, one was on Monday Night Football, this was like the seminal game of the year before the playoffs. And then, arguably one of the most popular athletes in the history of the world, his son has the same event. I'm like literally, this makes me believe we live in the Matrix, like we are in a simulation, because it just seems so devoid of the simplest, most common, like, just ask the question. You don't have to say it's the vaccine or it's not, or it's whatever, but you have to at least be willing to ask the question. And it was absolutely deafening silence.
Well, it used to be that the Overton window was determined by social mores and social values and public perceptions. And now what we found is that the Overton window has been controlled by the media, by the popular media. And so we're not allowed to ask, at least publicly in the media, about anything that contradicts the narrative. And that has come about from the security state that's managed the pandemic. And now we know that the security state has started leaking testimony, statements from people like Robert Kavlik, who yesterday or the day before admitted that he instructed Fauci and Collins to lie about the origin of the virus, to say that it was natural from the food market, the wet market spillover, and not created in the lab. Kadlec, who was Assistant Secretary of HHS at the time under Trump, did this because he obviously knew, and he said this, we knew that we had been funding gain-of-function research through Fauci, through NIAID, that's part of NIH, and the Department of Defense, and I forgot the other agency, to the tune of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to the grantees, some of whom, like Peter Daszak, was funding it through EcoHealth Alliance to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but there were other universities and labs in the US that were also doing this work, and they were creating monster viruses by gain-of-function research, and one of them either escaped or was released, we don't know which, in China in somewhere around summer or early fall of 2019, and that the security state realized this had happened and had to massively cover up its participation in and responsibility for this, that this research was done against the Obama administration's stopping of gain-of-function research from 2014 to 2017. The NIAID, or Fauci, approved continuing this research in spite of the stoppage of it. And this is what you get. The idea that gain-of-function research would lead to beneficial results because it would teach us how to make vaccines that could be used against the viruses showed two things. Number one, that was not true, that between 2015, when the gain-of-function research that NIAID had sponsored was published, and 2020, when we perceived the pandemic, there was no vaccine manufacturing going on for 5 years. So there was no interest in that. It was only a supposed theoretical but propaganda value for rationalization as to why gain-of-function research should go on. And then it still took a year to manufacture the vaccines, such as they are, once we knew we had a virus that was causing all of this respiratory disease. And so the premise that gain-of-function research would be beneficial was basically contraindicated by reality, both before and after the start of the pandemic. And the security state knew this, and it basically was controlling its legal exposure by trying to cover up everything. That's my opinion, and why all of the public health flipped 180 degrees from what were proper public health methods that were described in a seminal paper in 2006 by Tom Inglesby and Don Henderson, saying that general lockdowns don't work, closing airports don't work, masking doesn't work, that you only quarantine people who are symptomatic until they recover and let them out, and not everybody else, and so on. That social distancing, closing restaurants, and all that stuff doesn't work. That all this was known in the context of respiratory infections, flu in the case of that paper, but in general. And then comes 2020, and the security state takes over control of public health 6 days after the pandemic is declared, and they flip everything 180 degrees, and they say to do everything opposite to what that paper and public health is known for decades. So you ask, why did the security state, which took control, do that? And the only answer is because they had something to hide.
I think so, because the thing that always, blew my mind, the more the longer this went on and the further down all these rabbit trails we went, was, there was this sort of underlying dogma that, Gates would continually espouse, that, the thing that's going to wipe out humanity is a pandemic. The thing that's going to wipe out humanity is a pandemic. And I'm like, if a pandemic was going to wipe out humanity, why would it be now when, all of the developed world has water treatment plants and sewage treatment and reasonable hygiene? Wouldn't it have been in the dark ages when we first started living really close together and took a dump on our front lawn? Don't you think that
before
would be
antibiotics and
before antibiotics and before
malaria and all that. So there's actually much more evidence, in my opinion, which is that this has been a problem of human life for probably close to 1 million years, if not longer, that we have what in the junk DNA in our genomes, lots of viral sequences that viruses somehow managed to reverse transcribe themselves and get into our genes over millennia, over millions or hundreds of thousands of years. And that's what respiratory and other kinds of common exposure viruses do to humans. And my concern is much more teleological, which is what's going to happen in another 1 million years when the viral load keeps increasing and our genomes keep lengthening to the point where our genomic machinery has a harder time coping with reproducing our cells, integrated and accurately with all this junk DNA that keeps accumulating. So I won't be around to worry about that, but this is a natural process that we have evolved through, and to say that somehow this is going to somehow terminate human life in the modern age will only be because somebody did some interference that blocked our natural ability to cope with infections that we've always been coping with throughout human existence.
Okay. You said that way better than I did. That's exactly correct. You wrapped words around on what I had been thinking about for so long. It's just, but again, it's kind of common sense. It's back to my logging and trucking friends, and it's like, why would I want to be part of an experiment? And it's like, and it's the same thing. It's like the modern age has brought us lots of benefits that help people survive this. William Osler called pneumonia the king of the captain of the man of death, because it killed virtually everybody at some point. You got sick, you got old, you got pneumonia, you died. And now it's largely an inconvenience that we treat as an outpatient. And, occasionally people get really sick and need ventilators and, IV antibiotics and whatnot, but it's not like, it kills almost nobody in comparison to what it was before. But yet,
right, it's not a major cause of death anymore compared to cardiovascular.
Well, exactly. And so how do we get back? Like, I love the saying, don't ascribe motive when incompetence will do. And my feeling has always been that this was, I agree with Scott Atlas that this was just totally incompetence. And then they realized that they fumbled the football and they tried to cover it up, rather than there was some nefarious evil genius in a, remote lab in the Swiss Alps, like James Bond kind of pulling the strings.
Or in Houston, Texas.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So, where do we go from here? Like, is it just continually waking more people up to the fact that, we have kind of lost reason? Are you looking for alternative investments and tangible assets that help you build and protect your wealth while empowering your financial future? Look no further than Eckhart Enterprises. With over 37 years of experience in the industry, Eckhart Enterprises is your trusted partner in the world of alternative investments and asset management. They have a track record of success with more than 1,300 investors on board and over $700 million in capital invested in tangible assets.
Their specialty lies in offering immediate cash flow opportunities through mineral rights investments so that you don't have to wait decades to see your investments pay off. Their unique AML approach, born from decades of experience, focuses on aggregating, maturing, and liquidating assets strategically to maximize returns. Join Eckhart Enterprises. Visit EckhartEnterprises.com, spelled ECKARD, enterprises.com today to begin your journey toward building and protecting your financial future.
For more information about alternative investments and asset management, visit EckhartEnterprises.com. And remember, Eckhart Enterprises is your gateway to tangible assets and lasting financial success. Contact Eckhart today.
For more information about alternative investments and asset management, visit EckhartEnterprises.com, spelled ECKARDENTERPRISES.com ECKSES.com. And remember, Eckhart Enterprises is your gateway to tangible assets and lasting financial success. Contact Eckhart today.
Well, I agree with you. I think we need an international treaty to totally stop gain-of-function virus research. And there's a lot of motivation for that. If governments would actually start thinking about what's in their interest, it's not basically what you learn from public health is none of these infections ever stay localized to any particular country. Respiratory infections travel the world. It's not like Ebola or something like that, that is a localized non-respiratory infection that's direct contamination related, that has high mortality and low infectivity relatively to respiratory viruses. You cannot contain respiratory viruses in countries with large numbers of populations. They create pandemics. They get out of manageable stage after 4 or 5 infections, and so it's not realistic to think of them as a usable bioweapon that you can inflict on some other country. It will eventually come to inflict on you. You just have to wait long enough. And as totalitarian countries come to recognize this, they have to understand that it's in their interest not to be doing this. And if they want to think of other terror weapons, go let them work on nuclear weapons or something equally draconian, but not bioweapons that are not controllable. And so that's the first thing. We've got to get rid of all of this bioweapons infrastructure and all the research that's being funded everywhere to do this. And basically, the governments have to come clean, at least within their own organizations, about this and deal with it. That's the only way we're ever going to get through this. The evil scientists who are thinking, I've got a new technology, I can change the genes in this, and it'll make it even more human infectious. Let's just see whether that works. They have to stop. And because there is no way of controlling that there is no lab, even BSL-4 labs, that is completely guaranteed to be virus tight. And the labs in China were porous. Even I don't know about the quality of the BSL-4 lab at the WIV. That, of course, was built by BioMérieux, which was Stefan Bancel's previous company before he moved to Moderna and took his patents with him. There's no telling exactly how these are going to be virus tight, that people are human, that they don't clean up perfectly well, that they expose themselves one way or another, they carry this stuff out, it gets out eventually, that there's just no perfect way of dealing with this, no matter what you think the technology is, until we get to BSL 28 or something like that,
The world is international now. Everybody's
there's just no way.
Going everywhere, pretty much. Yeah.
Right. And so what we need to understand is that we need to have measures to manage pandemics, not to control them. Management means treating people ASAP with medications that work to suppress their risks of being hospitalized or dying. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we knew that hydroxychloroquine worked. A little later, we knew that ivermectin contributed to this. That may or may not be true now in Omicron and with other respiratory diseases, but there are plenty of things that could be used. And there's just virtually no evidence because the pharma space is not interested in cheap medications to see that they're helpful for respiratory diseases because they want to make scads of money, not do public good. And pharma has always been that way. And now we've awakened to that fact, seeing all the damage that pharma has done over the last 4 years.
I got all these questions in my head as we're talking and thinking, now that you brought that up. Well, first off, because I wanted to try to bring back this, we were talking about turbo cancers and trying to glean as much as we could in this episode sort of about where we're going. And it sounds like we're going to have to sort of wait and see because the data is limited and it's time as these evolve. I know we were talking earlier before we started recording about, you've been traveling internationally, but people want to know what is the other experience of other countries with data on cancer surveillance or their findings of these numbers in their reporting system. Is it pretty similar to what's happening here in America? Are we going to have to just wait and see, or isn't there something going on in the UK where they have a bit better evidence collecting and reporting on cancers coming out, turbo cancer, or the numbers? Or am I wrong?
Well, I haven't seen any data from outside the US yet on cancer. Again, I think it's going to be the same wait and see approach that we'll have to be patient about. Certainly, other countries are putting out their mortality data, and Steve Kirsch has had access to New Zealand mortality data, has been talking about it. He now has Medicare data that he's talking about. I think he's made some of that public, and we'll be talking more tomorrow, Thursday of this week at MIT, giving a talk on his findings. And I think that's important to look at and put into the hopper of what we know about mortality from the vaccines. And, we are fighting an uphill battle because pharma and the government doesn't want people to know about the damage caused by these vaccines, because they have been representing this as a one-size-fits-all, everybody should take approach to dealing with the pandemic that is no longer the pandemic of the first 2 years. It has been, over the last 2 years, a common cold flu-like illness that has no business rousing up fear and emergency the way the SARS-CoV-2 did in its first 2 years of existence. We've hit Muller's ratchet. That's what saved us from the pandemic, and not the vaccines, not even the early treatments, because the early treatments weren't used. They would have had they been used, but they weren't used all that much. I mean, a few 100,000 people that I know of, but in the U.S. But so Muller's ratchet and Omicron is what's saved the population and allowed us to return to essentially normal life.
Speaking of using alternative medications that are safe that have been hindered, such as the hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and I know you're not, practicing medicine clinician, but are you following or listening to anything about the reports of using thebendazole for some of these cancers that are popping up in patients? Because I've been doing a little reading on that, and some friends have been asking about it as an addition to their regular, obviously, chemo, cancer therapy, radiation, etc. And there's been some reports on using this. Is it something you've been following? Do you think the government's going to be suppressing that as well because of financial interests in selling chemo and radiation and making money? Or
unfortunately, I think that's the case. I've seen reports. They're anecdotal kinds of reports, so we don't know. It's the same story as hydroxychloroquine. Oh, everything is anecdotal, right? It's not true, but that was what was said publicly. I think that there's also now reports of using pseudo sugars instead of sucrose in diet, like allulose or something like that, to provide nutritional sweetening taste without caloric content, to cut glucose availability to cancers, to keep them from growing. This is all theoretical. I have no idea about the efficacy of this in the real world, but people should be looking at all of this stuff and trying it out, because in our war on cancer, we've won a few battles, but we haven't won the war, and we still have a long way to go to make cancer into a really treatable disease that doesn't scare everybody out of their wits by that label.
What do you think about cancer surveillance now going forward? And in the public health realm, people are thinking, okay, if this is I've had breast cancer treated when I was 35, it's been in remission, everything's great. Do I do screening mammography more frequently? Should I, if I'm at high risk for colon cancer, maybe do I get a colonoscopy sooner? Do you think there's going to be any talk about changing the recommendations by the U.S. preventive tests? I mean, are they going to just say, forget it? I guess
Well, what I think is, in the optimal scientific world, what they should say is the recommendations are pretty good so far for people who are unvaccinated, and vaccinated people, you should do things twice as often. until we have data to show how effective or not effective that is. I'm just speaking off the top of my head on that. But the idea is such that when you reduce immune surveillance, you do create the opportunities for things to occur more frequently, and therefore the screening mechanisms that appear to have been beneficial need to be used more aggressively. At least that's my kind of unofficial opinion as of now. Whether this would actually be employed, I have no idea. I'm not on the task force.
It seems like it would make
I don't
sense,
know.
right? If that's going to be the trend where these cancers are becoming reactivated, more aggressive, that you want to do screening surveillance more frequently. But then are they going to be blocking you by they're not going to pay for it?
No, it's
the
exactly
insurance company is going to say,
it's
forget
exactly what's
it.
going to happen.
You're going to just have to pay yourself.
No,
Patients are going to be screwed.
Yeah, right. I did utilization management for 20 years, and I can tell you exactly how this is. I can tell you exactly how this is going to work. There's no evidence.
Yeah.
So screw you, die of your cancer. That's how that ends. Like that's insurance companies aren't going to want to pay for extra surveillance. It's expensive, especially colonoscopies. And then you're going to have to sue a company like United Healthcare, which is what, $385 billion a year or whatever it is, and somehow win to change anything. So
well, there's an alternative. The alternatives is somebody starts up colonoscopies are us, and says we'll do a colonoscopy for $300. Just pay cash.
Or Costa Rica.
Well,
that's what my dad did. Honestly, he did.
Yes. But you could do it. But Harvey's 100% correct. You could do it here. You could do it in the back of a Sprinter van that you drove around subdivisions, and
there's a retirement job for you.
Yeah, exactly. Until you perf someone's bowel, and then it's like whoopsie. Then you need the surgery van to come right behind.
Well, but maybe there will be. Seriously, we have surgery centers for hips, knees, all that stuff. Maybe there will be innovation in that way. I don't know.
Well, don't forget Japan had mobile endoscopy vans for many years. I don't know if they still do, but because Helicobacter pylori was so common in Japan, and stomach ulcers, gastric ulcers were so common, they were doing endoscopies on everybody for preventive screening, and so they had mobile vans to do that.
No, I did not know that.
It's not
See, I don't want to be the guy that's in the van. I want to be the guy that has the company that runs the vans. You don't want to be, you want to be near. It's like it was like buying into the weed industry in Oregon. You didn't want to be a weed farmer. There's way too many. You wanted to be the guy selling the fertilizer to the weed farmer. That was the business opportunity.
Until the state says only organic fertilizer.
Well, and then they just ship it from the state capital because they produce so much organic fertilizer there. It's not even funny. So no, that's a good point. I love that question, man. It really is. Our cancer screening is going to change. Now, you spoke about one of the only pieces of data that we can kind of get, with some reliability across nations is all-cause mortality. I mean, if people are dead or alive. That's a pretty binary, piece of information.
Yes, and pretty
so
well
where
defined,
have we gone in all-cause mortality since the, since the pandemic? Like you would expect a big spike in all-cause mortality if the pandemic was this thing that was killing a bunch of people, and you would have the deadwood phenomenon where you take out a bunch of old sick people, and then you would expect, I would imagine, a decrease in all-cause mortality in 21, 22. And then maybe a leveling now. But what's actually happening?
Well, that's not what the insurance company's data is showing.
No, I know. And that's what
No. So the insurance companies in 2022 and early 2023 were talking more publicly. There were 5 or 6 insurance companies, mostly in the U.S., one in Germany, I believe, that were talking about increased mortality claims. Some of them were increased numbers of claims in working age people, 18 to 64. Some were talking about increased numbers of claims. Others were talking about increased dollar amounts of payouts of claims. And they were noticing somewhere between 25 and 40% increases, which were dramatic from their actuarial points of view. And attributing it through to the vaccination rollouts because they could time it pretty well, better than cancers as to when this started and so on. And I think that the New Zealand data that Steve Kirsch has looked at are showing a very similar thing of excess all-cause mortality after COVID vaccines, after the first, after the second, maybe after the third, I think also, especially in older adults over age 65. They're seeing that peaking somewhere around 6 months after each vaccine dose. And that's very troubling that it's in their data. He's also seeing similar in the Medicare data, but I don't know if that's public yet. It will be in a day or two or something. So the Medicare data also show the same thing, excess mortality in that in the 6 to 12 month period after each vaccine dose, and especially compared to things like flu vaccines, the pneumonia vaccines, which do not show excess mortality like that anywhere near the way the COVID vaccines do in individual data from Medicare and from the New Zealand HMO data. So I think these are real findings. It's real information. These are real trends that are being seen. And it's very difficult to assert that something else in parallel with the fact of vaccination is really what's causing this mortality. Like, are people becoming suicidal after the vaccines, or are people getting into traffic accidents because their left arm isn't working because of the vaccines, or are they texting each other while driving because they're going crazy from the vaccines? I mean, there's no way to say exactly what the cause is other than it's very, very tightly associated with the fact of vaccination. Is it the vaccines? Well, use your common sense. Don't be looking for, as we say, don't look for zebras when you hear hoofbeats in the street.
I love it.
That the more common outcome is more likely to be what's actually happening.
Yes.
It's like saying, we don't have any data on whether a 45 to the temple at point blank range is lethal. Well, you're right. There is no data to say whether that's lethal.
Well, we should do a randomized controlled trial.
If we get to pick who's in each category, that would be then it wouldn't be double blinded. Yeah, but like some of this is it's like obvious things are obvious things, and it's not just that people aren't making the connection or unwilling to make the connection. It's that they're not even willing to ask the question. To me suggests they know the answer, because people that are confident in their beliefs or whatever, like I don't ever worry, I don't worry about whether we're faithful to each other. We've crossed that bridge, but also if she came home at 3:30 every morning for the next 2 weeks, I'd ask the question because I'm confident enough in the relationship to get the right answer. And if it was kind of weird, I'd be like, hey, maybe we need to go talk to somebody else because this is.
Hey, I'm making some secret Christmas money.
Yeah, exactly. Working the poll again. Yeah.
No, she's filling out the Bears forms.
Exactly. Yeah, it's
the same.
Yeah, it's like a epidemiology OnlyFans. You sit there and just fill out Bears forms, and people watch you fill them out, and it's like, wow, that's amazing. So, yeah, but that's what just boggles my mind is you can't even ask. Asking the question means you're crazy or a conspiracy theorist. No, asking the question means you have common sense.
Well, that's what I've been saying. This is the Overton window propaganda that's been inflicted on us so that we can't ask the question, that nobody's allowing us to ask the question in normal public spaces, not the alternative media spaces. And this is obviously a social pathology that anybody with any common sense who says, why can't we ask this question? There must be something wrong with the society that says you can't ask this question. It's scientifically speaking, It's a fair question. So there must be something wrong with the society that says that.
But it's not like this hasn't happened before, and that's the other thing. It's like this. It's the whole like the Holocaust stuff where it was like, you're telling me the German people didn't recognize when like 4, 5, 6, 8 million people just weren't in their town anymore. And oh, by the way, they were certain ethnicities, or they were mentally disabled, or they were homosexual. And you just sit there and you go, Well, of course they knew. They maybe didn't know the details of what was going on in the camps, but they knew something was up.
Yeah.
That's right. They knew. But, you know, as I sort of learned in 2020, I felt like I was living in the good Americans, you know, like the good Germans, that we were living in a totalitarian regime when regular mainstream public media was big lying, putting out big lie after big lie. I knew that there were big lies because I knew what the scientific evidence was on hydroxychloroquine, and I knew that all these things were smears and lies and misrepresentations. When I was saying this drug works in early treatment of high-risk outpatients, and they were saying, well, this study of hospital patients shows that it doesn't work. You know, well, that's a big lie because it's irrelevant, because it doesn't address what I was addressing. And, you know, when the FDA puts out a webpage, which I believe is still there today, 4 years later, saying that hydroxychloroquine shouldn't be used in outpatients because of risk of cardiac arrhythmia problems. And then in the small print, it says, we base this on one study of hospitalized patients, that this is a big lie. It's a big lie in public that's been there for 3.5 years. And this is our government saying this big lie. So I knew that we were in the 1935 Germany equivalent in the United States back in mid 2020 already. And it's kind of gone downhill ever since, you know, with people saying in public, public talking heads, I wish unvaccinated people would die. You know, why should we give them hospital beds? Why, you know, all this stuff, not understanding that this was not a question of allegiance. It was a question of scientific evidence, and that the propagandized people and their fear, they were acting out their fear, not thinking about a rational way of managing a
but
pandemic.
That's exactly
True.
right. You know,
it's disgusting. I mean, even physicians were saying.
Oh no, absolutely they were
bad.
But I mean, there was an article. I reached out to the author. I can't remember his name. He I think he's a Jesuit guy. He's a physician, and he wrote an article of why were so many doctors Nazis? Like they were at the.
Oh, that was Ashley Fernandez that wrote that in Tablet magazine.
Excellent article.
Yes,
it's like it wasn't that doctors were the last to, you know, they were coerced into the party. They were they were at the front of the line.
Yeah.
They were the first to sign up. And I think this is for two reasons. Number one, doctors are pseudo-intellectuals. They spend their time dealing with theories. They learn theories in medical school. After all of the medical evidence that you and I learned are basically theories that are only established when we see it in real life in real patients. And so they live in a theoretical universe. The second thing is doctors have to have a schizophrenic personality, that you have empathy for patients on one side, but you have to have technical expertise that puts aside that empathy when you're doing your technical work. You don't want the surgeon crying over the surgical field while he's doing the operation. You want the surgeon to be technically in the moment, in the practical aspects of the surgery, devoid of emotions. And it's very easy for doctors to slip and push one of those capabilities to the side and be totally in the intellectual domain rather than in the emotional domain. And that's, I think, what's happened, that doctors have rationalized everything, as well as the fact that they feel threatened, that their careers are on the line, that their status is on the line, all the work they've put into getting their careers is on the line if they buck the public messaging. So there's a lot of reasons why doctors would not be the first line of defense against all this stuff.
Well captured, and you're right.
It's true. I mean,
in the way of thinking,
it's usually artists.
Yeah,
that's the part that's wild. Like you look at these revolutions, and it's like you know, oh, the dancer's standing up or the painter. It's like, wow, you know, they see through the bullshit.
Well, they're used to extracting meaning out of chaotic life. You know, they're used to seeing patterns of things in a right brain sort of way.
I
absolutely.
Tons of stuff that we've written in the newsletter. I always say, like, I love going to artists and asking the question. It seems, you know, fittingly, Megadeth's last album that came out in the middle of the pandemic was called "The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead," and I'm like, well, isn't that we have all three?
Yes. So any I'm going to give you the sort of the last words of maybe a positive spin or hope or words of wisdom to people as far as what to expect, or I don't know, take their health in their hands with their physician to be on the lookout for
She's
potential.
trying to put a positive spin on this, and I'm the guy. I'm the guy that's
Okay.
adding. I'm the guy that's sitting in the bar as the Titanic scrapes the iceberg, and I'm just putting more ice in my cocktail. So I'm that guy, and she's trying to.
Not quite that bad. Well, to some degree, doctors are still afraid of their shadows. My wife's general internist, every time she visits her, the doc says, "Have you gotten your COVID shots yet?" And my wife says, "No." And she says, "You could die." And, that's unacceptable. And from my point of view, then what I would like to say is that COVID in the Omicron era has gone from a worrisome respiratory illness to a take in stride respiratory illness. That we take flu in stride as a society. Flu does kill 30 to 50,000 people, very, very about to die people, takes them over the edge, very frail, elderly, and people with chronic conditions. So about, 30, 50,000 people a year in the U.S. die from flu. Some 10 or 20,000 die from the common cold, similar reasons. Similar numbers die from traffic accidents. Similar numbers die from gunshot wounds, 2/3 of which are self-inflicted. And other suicides, 100,000 or so die from fentanyl poisoning. 500,000 die every year from tobacco usage, another self-inflicted suicide behavior foisted on us by the government. And so to put COVID now in context of if there are 25 or 35,000 people dying from Omicron COVID infections, it's in people who have lots of chronic conditions, that's just like the flu, putting them over the edge. That this is something that is unfortunate and perhaps treatable, but that we as a society should be taken in stride. So the fear level should go to zero on COVID now. That's the first thing. The second thing is we as a society have COVID fatigue. We are tired of COVID. We are tired of all of the intrusions and limitations in our health and our behaviors that governments have inflicted, and companies and schools and universities have inflicted on us from COVID. We want that done, gone. And we don't want that extrapolated into flu and other things, to giving carte blanche license to all those entities to come after us for even more invasive, intrusive limitations and behaviors, thinking that if it worked for COVID, they can do it for this, because it's unwarranted. We as a society don't live that way. So that leads me to where I think we need to be going on this. And that is that we shouldn't be talking about all of these things so much as who said and did what during the pandemic, lining up the evidence for who was responsible for doing what, and making databases of the people who inflicted this on us and what their roles were, what they said that was untrue, and what their culpabilities were, and creating information sources for that. Senator Johnson has documented a huge amount of that. I think that going forward, we want to do more of that and actually be explicit in naming names of the people who've admitted it or described others that they know who've been doing it, like Robert Cadillac did just last night or the night before. That was in an interview on Sky News Australia, so it's out there in public, and so on, that we are going to document this and then move forward as best we can with holding people responsible for doing what they did. And that's the best way that we're going to come out of this, that we as a society are not looking for vengeance. We're looking for justice. We're looking for a system that will put a check and balance on people doing this against us again in future propagandized circumstances where we as a population can be taken advantage of. We need to protect us and our society, and we do this by holding people responsible for what they did. And I'm optimistic that as people do that and see that, and many people are, that they will take on this work and do more of it. And I think this is what's going to help our society get back to feeling normal and empowered and responsible for taking care of itself.
I love it.
I can't say anything else because I'll just take all those nice words and make the podcast sound dumb.
Okay, you're cut off, and I'm just going to wrap it up and say thanks again, Harvey, for being here. We always love having you on the show, and you're full of tons of knowledge, wisdom, as well as all the details that we don't have. We can't access as well as you, and totally appreciate you just joining us and sharing with our listeners all of that. And I'm sure we will have you back on soon as things continue to unravel, and there's always going to be new info coming forward. So we will keep in touch.
Well, this is great. And I have to also to remind you, like we've seen, is to keep your sense of humor.
We will never, well, for sure, Tim will never lose. And I just kind of go with the flow, but same with everybody else. So thanks again for being here. And I hope your mild cold heals fast without consequence.
That's
and I don't know. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, great episode. As usual, Dr. Risch never disappoints. He is just such a treasure to American medicine. And, brought out a lot of questions. I hope we get answers to, what causes what and what in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here.
And then, honestly, while there's not great conclusive data or really any linking these rise in cancers yet directly to what's been going on, especially with the jabs, he emphasized the need for importance of more rigorous surveillance, cancer surveillance data, especially among people that have been vaccinated, and
especially multiply.
Right. And it was great that he talked about the inadequacy of the current screening recommendations and the urging healthcare systems to consider more frequent screenings to catch things early. But do you agree with him?
Well, yeah, I think the thing that has slapped me across the face during all of this over the last, now going on 4 years is don't believe your lying eyes. Let's quote the Eagles, which is you see something, but then the authorities tell you it's not true. And then you see it again and again and again and again. Like when we were working in urgent care and, within 2 months of the vax rollout, we're seeing all of these side effects. And it's like, we've never seen this before. We're going on 30 years of medical practice. I have given thousands of vaccines to kids. And all of a sudden it's like, what's going on? And people are like, well, no, it's just COVID. Well, it's just this, it's just that. It's like, okay, it might be, but let's ask the question and let's get the actual answers.
Well, I want to know what the people think, what our listeners think. So let us know what you think at doc@bsfreemd.com or on our social media, and keep it BS free, and stay tuned for our next episodes.
Yes, and shout out to shout out to one of my writing buddies, Jason Peter. Welcome to the BS Free MD community. Thank you for jumping on one of our live streams. It was fun. It was great to have you join us for Doc Tales. We're thrilled you're here and hope you enjoy the rest of the time with us. How couldn't you? All of our time together has been amazing.
Tim's totally looking forward to entertaining you some more. So please tune in again and share with an unsuspecting coworker or friend. Thanks again, Jason. Thanks, everybody. We'll see y'all next time. Now, a final word from our sponsor. At Pearson Ravitz, they understand that life can change in an instant. It's hard to imagine that a sudden illness, injury, or catastrophic event could put you and your family in a devastating financial situation. Physician-founded and physician-focused, Pearson Ravitz builds human connections before they create quotes. Visit www.pearsonravitz.com today and embark on a journey of safeguarding your future. It's no secret that medicine is a bit, uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
But we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible. We can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.